Hi, I'm Kimmy with On William Street, and we are here to help you become a more confident quilter, from the piecing to the quilting and everything in between. We are so excited for today because we have teamed up with a bunch of other quilters to bring to you a whole bunch of fun tips and tricks in celebration of National Quilting Day. So after you finish this video, make sure that you check the description below and so that you can see links to all of the other quilters that are participating. Our tip, we are going to share with you how to do freezer paper foundation paper piecing. Now, just a reminder, everything that we're going to talk about, we do also have in our blog post. So you're going to see a link below that, and that's going to go over all the steps and all the materials and everything that we're going to talk about today. Also, don't forget to check out our shop where you can find your next modern quilting project. So why freezer paper for foundation paper piecing? If you've ever done foundation paper piecing and after you get the paper on and you have to go through and pull all the paper off, it can be kind of a little bit of a pain. So the freezer paper is actually going to solve that problem and you're not going to have any papers to pull off afterwards. The reason we use freezer paper is because this shiny side, actually when you iron it, it sticks to your fabric a little bit. So it holds it all in place so you don't have to actually sew the template to the pattern to still get that precision. Also, it's really nice because we're going to be able to reuse these templates a few times before we have to get a new one. So we're going to be doing one of our blocks from one of our newest patterns called I Love You that we're working on. And so this is one of the little heart blocks that we're going to be demoing for you. And on a quilt pattern like this, the freezer paper works really nice because for this pattern, you're going to be making multiples of each of the blocks. So you can print out just a couple sets of templates as opposed to one for each block. So to do this, we have taken our freezer paper and we have a great big roll. We love to use freezer paper in our crafts and a lot of people do. So we have a great big roll and we just cut them down to size to 8.5 by 11 and we printed directly on the freezer paper. So if you're worried if it's not going to go through your printer because it's a little bit curled up, we just like to, before I put it in, we just roll it backwards, make a really loud crinkly noise. Kind of roll it around a little bit, and then when you unfold it, you can usually get it flat enough that it will go through your printer no problem. And I just put them in one piece at a time and print them off one piece at a time, or else you can put them through like the back of your printer. So they're just feeding through one sheet, so you don't have to worry about it accidentally grabbing extras since it's not going to lay quite not as nice and flat as regular paper always does. So now that we have our templates printed, we are ready to go ahead and start quilting. So we're going to gather up an assortment of some fabrics. We have just an assortment of some fun pinks, light, dark, and medium pinks, and then a contrasting color here with a little bit of some backgrounds, and we're ready to get started. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and I've got the first couple blocks, A and B, over here, and I'm just going to cut them out. You don't have to necessarily cut them out exactly, so we're just going to make them a little bit smaller and easier to work with. Okay, so now that we have our template ready to cut out, we're ready to go ahead and start adding on the fabrics. So I've kind of got all my pieces here cut out in some starting sizes. On this pattern, we have the pieces all written on there to give you an idea of kind of what to start with. And we're going to go down here to the first piece. We're going to find the A1. And this one, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to iron it directly to the template, making sure that that whole piece is covered with, my 1/4 inch extra on here so that we can get that seam in there. And if this is a printed fabric, make sure that your print is facing up. So the back of the fabric is going to be ironed to the freezer paper. And I'm just going to take it over to the iron and just iron it right on and it's going to stick nicely. Now that this piece is on, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to find the line between A1 and A2. And we're going to be peeling the fabric back off of it and just folding it directly on that line. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch seam. And then the next color I need is pink. So I'm going to take this little square and it's going to fit just like this. And I'm going to line it up. And then what I like to do is you can actually hold it up to the light. And if you look through, I'm not going to be able to show you here, but hold it up to the light and you can see through this enough to make sure that you're covering this whole piece. Before I fold it back, that's going to let me know if I need to rearrange that pink piece a little bit. So now that it's all lined up, I'm going to sew. Normally you would fold it back and you would sew on that line, but I'm actually going to leave this folded back and I'm going to sew right next to the freezer paper. Don't catch the freezer paper, just sew right next to it. So now when I go ahead and sew, I'm just going to sew and use the foot to make sure that I'm sewing right next to the line. And you want to be as close as you can without actually hitting that freezer paper. Because if you hit the freezer paper, then we're going to have to tear it off and you're not going to be able to reuse it. So now you can see it's gone ahead. We've sewn it, but it hasn't caught the freezer paper. So now we're just going to go ahead and fold back the pink and then sew and then iron it so that now the freezer paper will hold it in place and get ready for the next piece. Now that that piece is done, we're going to go ahead and find the next piece, and now we're going to do the teal, and I'm going to do the same thing. Just fold it back along that line between the next two sections. So this is the same as if you were doing, regular foundation paper piecing. We're just not going to fold it back and sew on it. It's basically the only difference. So I'm going to trim those off to be that 1/4 inch, and then I've got my next piece. So this one, I know I'm not going to be lining it up on that. I want to make sure that it's covering the whole rectangle, so I'm going to leave it off, and I'm going to come back and trim that in just a minute. I'm not going to worry about it right now. So before I trim that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to sew right next to that line. Now that it's sewn, I'm just going to go ahead and trim both of those to that 1/4 inch so that that teal matches that other seam. Set that piece aside, and now I can go ahead and fold this back and iron that up on my template as well. Now that that one is ironed, trimmed, and ironed on, we're ready to go ahead and add the very last piece on this section. Pull it back, fold it on the line, trim it off, and then add that last pink corner. And then we're going to sew that on, and then this section will be completed. All right, now that it's all sewn on, I can go ahead and trim it down to size. So the one thing with this method is you are not going to want to sew the sections together with the template still in place, because then you'll be sewing through the template. So we're going to trim them all down to size. And then I am going to leave it on for now. I'm not going to pull it off until, whoops, we're going to trim them off straight. And I'm not going to pull them off until right before we put all the pieces together. That way I don't have to remember which piece is what. And it keeps things nice and organized while we wait. So that section is done, and I'm ready to go ahead and make the second section. All right, now we have all 4 of our pieces done for this block, and we're ready to hook them together. So we have it so that we're going to connect sections A and B first. So I'm going to just go ahead now, peel off the paper, and you're done. No paper to tear, no seams to worry about. It just comes off, and you're ready to go ahead. And then, like I said, you can reuse these 2 or 3 times until the sticky goes away. So now we're ready to go ahead, and we're just going to line these up. Because we don't have the papers on there, we are going to go ahead, make sure that you're nesting seams if it nests. This one should nest, and you put some couple pins in there, line up your points here, and give it a couple pins before you sew it together. But now we're just going to sew 1/4 inch on that seam. Now I've ironed those 2, ironed the seam, and I just ironed it to the side. These are nice, simple foundation blocks, so we won't have lots of seams to worry about. And then we're going to add on block piece C to the next. So again, just flip it over, and you can just pull that paper right off. It's stuck so well I can't pull it off. Okay. And then we're ready to sew it to sections A and B. So now we're ready for the last piece. So as you can see, while it does take a little bit of extra effort at the beginning to print on the freezer paper, like we had to cut them out as 8.5 by 11 and make sure they go in the printer and everything, you can really save some time afterwards. So if this is a method that you want to try, we definitely kind of recommend it. If you prefer the paper, don't worry, that works just as well. So you don't have to use this method, but it can save you some time and save you some mess as you're putting a lot of foundation paper piece blocks together. So I'm gonna go ahead and sew up that last seam. So with no extra little tiny pieces of paper, we have our block done. Like I said, this is great for our patterns where you're repeating the same block over and over. So now you can reuse the templates and you don't have to print out a whole bunch. It's also great if you have large pieces. So I was able to go ahead and, iron it completely to the large pink section so that it doesn't really move around. So it works great if you have blocks with large pieces. If you have one that's got super tiny precision, just make sure that you're being really careful with your folding and your sewing, and you can still match that little precision even with the freezer paper where you're not sewing through the paper. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Also, our I Love You pattern that features 6 different fun little foundation paper pieced hearts is going to be releasing soon. So check our, sign up for our newsletter. Make sure you're checking out our Facebook and Instagram so that you can see when that releases, when that pattern is available. If you have any questions, shoot us a message, let us know. And don't forget to check out the blog for all the details, everything that we went over. If you want to see it in more detail, check out the blog to get that information, and we will see you next time.